If you've ever heard of the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your mileage is easy running, then today's guest, Matt Fitzgerald, has already helped your training. He's the author of many well-known running books, as well as founder and coach for the 80-20 Endurance Group. He's also a repeat guest on the show, and the day before this episode comes out, released his new book on how to master the sport of running. I think I might have accidentally said the day after in the show, but if you're listening, it's out, so check out the link in the show notes. Mastery, as he describes it, has nothing to do with talent, or even time and resources. That means that if you're listening as a 5-hour marathoner with a full-time job, it's still completely possible to reach your full potential as an athlete. I think it's a pretty cool concept, to be honest, reaching your personal limits. And I wanted to get Matt on the show to share what it takes to get there and how he believes that he managed to master running as a 50-something-year-old non-pro runner. Matt is one of the most knowledgeable writers out there, but he's also a really down-to-earth guy who told me that he wants to normalize drinking beer on running podcasts, which you'll see if you're watching on YouTube. So with that, let's get into the interview. Matt, it's good to have you on the show, and I'm not sure if I should welcome you here for the first time or back, as I think you were with a different host, but great to have you with us on Run to the Top.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Cool. And last time you were here, was it Claire or was it Finn who would have been host?
Claire. Yeah.
It was Claire. Okay. That was for a different book you had written. The Comeback Quotient, I think, was the focus, right?
Uh-huh. Yes. I lose track. I got to be honest. I write a lot of books.
Fair enough. Honestly, I'm a big fan of that one as well. I think really good insight into athlete mentality for anyone listening. But our focus today is on one of your more recent books, which I think will be coming out just after this interview releases, which is called Chasing Mastery. Do you want to give us a little bit of a hint as to what's in that book?
Sure thing. Yes. So, in addition to writing a lot of books about running, I'm also a running coach. I'm coming at you from Dream Run Camp in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is like a fantasy training retreat for adult runners that never ends. It just operates year round. So, coaching is what I do. And I view my role as my job is to help runners move toward mastery of their sport, because I'm not a life coach. I'm not a therapist, I need to stay in my lane as a running coach. And for me, you can still have a pretty fulsome relationship with an athlete as a coach, staying in your lane if you have that mastery orientation, because it's like a developmental way of looking at finding out what's possible for you as an athlete. The idea of you can grow as a person as you grow as an athlete, you're truly developing. And for me, that's the way I approach running as an athlete myself, and so that's what I try to share with the athletes I coach, and by extension, Chasing Mastery is exactly that. Because it's not really talked about all that much, the idea of what are we ultimately even doing here? In as much as the sport is a hobby for most of us, but it's still a very important hobby. It's a passion. It's what's the North Star? Goals aren't it, because as soon as you achieve a goal, you just set another goal that's harder. So what are we trying to get to? So that's what I'm trying to contribute.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I like to think that running's pretty important, but you're probably somewhat obsessed with the sport if you're listening to this, because I think for the majority of people listening, about how to master running around as fast as you can is probably not at the top of their priorities list.
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
So one of the things that stood out to me right from the start of your book is you kind of talk about how you had this different idea going into it about I think it was something about becoming a journal for endurance training and how to master that. Yeah. But I think it's a really nuanced difference between that and, mastering your sport or achieving your full potential. Would love to hear your thoughts on what it actually means to achieve mastery and how that's different from just perfecting your training.
Yes, exactly. So, really the core idea, the thing that's going to be novel for a lot of runners, is making a distinction between performance and competence. And I can try to make that make sense just through the example of myself. I started running competitively when I was 11 years old. I don't think I actually fulfilled my potential, which means like I wasn't leaving anything on the table. Like if I look back at a training cycle and the A race it culminated in and said like, wow, there's really not much I could have done better. In terms of like what I had under my control. For me, that took like 35 years, and I was actually past my physical prime when I got to that point where I really felt just in control, like the boss of myself, like as a runner. Like I wasn't necessarily setting PRs, but I was more satisfied because I knew I was getting more out of myself. So that's the distinction. The idea that in one sense, a 4-hour marathoner can be better at running than a 3-hour marathoner because the 3-hour marathoner actually has the potential to run much faster, but the 4-hour marathoner in this example doesn't. So it's like, well, like it's one thing to be given the gift of talent. It's another thing to do something with your talent. That's actually under your control, and that's the more satisfying journey.
Yeah, and is that a gut feeling? Because it's so easy to know if you PR'd or you ran faster than somebody else,
Yes.
but how do you actually know if you've mastered this sport, or is it even possible to fully master it?
Yeah, I would say, it's like an asymptote. You can keep approaching it. Because, like, honestly, if you have what it takes as an athlete to get really close to mastery, then you're never going to stop refining, because you have what it takes to, just like always learn, always like just, find new ways to get more out of yourself. So yeah, I don't think the journey ever ends. But like, how do you know? This like, forgive how this sounds, but I really do think I got to that point, where like I felt like I did kind of master running after 35 years. And what it felt like to me was self-trust. Like I just, as an athlete now, I walk around with like unshakable self-trust. I know I'm going to make mistakes and make bad decisions, but I don't make nearly as many as I used to. And I know that like those aren't going to be ruinous mistakes or bad decisions, that I know I can always figure it out. I just know it. And so like if you feel that and you're walking around with that, like you know it, you're wide awake. For so long in my athletic journey, I had a lot of fear and anxiety and doubt, and I know that got a lot better. Like all that stuff was attenuated. Like those voices became whispers, and the voice of self-trust became a shout. So that's one. It's a feeling. But that feelings are life, so it's just great to be on the starting line of a race. Like it's, for me, recent ones, 100-kilometer trail ultramarathon, and just like not be afraid. Like it's not that you're bored or not into it. Like you're very eager, but you're not afraid. You're like, I know that like it's going to be hard and surprises are going to be thrown at me, but I just know I can figure it out. Like I know I'm not going to let myself down, where the things I control are concerned. So that's one. And then the other one is retrospective. When you look back and do a post-mortem on a training cycle and a race, if you can it helps maybe if you have a coach also helping you keep honest about it. But to look back at it and say, you know what? Not much to improve here. I mean, there's always something. There's always some lesson. But I think if you have those two things coupled together, one kind of before and during, and the other one after, you're close.
Matt, I'm going to ask what might be a pretty blunt question, but you're out living training with some of the most elite athletes in Flagstaff. After saying that you feel like you've pretty much conquered the sport,
Yeah.
why not say the hell with it and, tie up your laces if you feel like you've already reached your full potential?
Yeah. Honestly, for some people, that's exactly what they do. I can only speak to myself. like I've had a lot of interruptions actually in my running journey. I ran competitively from age 11 to like 17 and a half, then burned out and quit, and I didn't really run for a decade. Got back into it in my late 20s, like with a lot of regret actually. Like, oh man, what I could have been a contender, and I threw it all away. And so I was hungry. And I had peers, people I raced against in high school who didn't quit, who ran through college, who ran post collegiately. And then by the time they were my age, like 28, they were burned out. And so for me, that wasn't the case. So though I had a lot of regret, I was very hungry and I just got after it. But I, for whatever reason, got injured a lot. And so I would have big injury interruptions. So I always felt like this thing just keeps being taken away from me. And like and so when I got it back, I was still hungry, throughout my 30s, like into my 40s, like still hungry. Then I got COVID, and I got long COVID at 49. And then I lost 4 years. And at 49, I was kicking ass. Like I was still like really getting after it competitively. And it was taken away from me in a way that's far worse than any injury. Just like my health giving out, like 4 years gone. So only within the past year, I've been able to like get it back again. And what I find, like every time I come back to it, it's new, it's different, it's exciting. And so that possibility is out there. And yeah, a lot changes and a lot is taken away from you, especially as you get like, I'm in my 50s, like how about your 60s and your 70s? Like, it has to scratch a kind of different itch over time, but we see it happen. And it's no tragedy if you decide to, hang up your spikes and take up golf. If that's what you want, I mean, fine. But I think that possibility is out there where you can feel like, wow, I've come a long way in this journey, and it still excites me. It still takes me new places.
When you're at a stage in life where you're retired, you've given up authoring, do you think you're gonna switch over to that golfing side, or do you see yourself running throughout your life?
I actually don't see myself like running till my last day. I don't think it's really in the cards for me, honestly. And so I'm just open to it. The thing that I just couldn't live with was like having it taken away from me before I was ready. So, my dad, the reason I became a runner is that my dad was a runner back in the 1980s, and his running career came to an end when he fell on black ice, broke his hip, like didn't go to get it checked out, developed necrosis, had to have a hip replacement. And this is a long time ago when it was always like, you're a runner, huh? Well, not anymore. Like if you had a hip replacement. So like that was the last time he ever ran. And he went through like a grieving process, but like it didn't last all that long. And he was basically fine. He got really into walking. So yeah, that'll be my story as well. I just, yeah, I think I'll have like a good 10 years as a post runner, like, and not missing it.
I feel like you both have an endurance athlete's mindset, both your father, and I'm sorry for what happened, but to transition that quickly to walking, but even on your end, to see him go through that and think, I want some of that sport, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'd love to draw out a bit of a timeline here, because I know you talked about how you suffered some long COVID and maybe had to tie back the sneakers for a little, but I think somewhere in there, maybe just before, you were actually training with some of the best athletes on the planet to achieve a new personal best before taking another bit of a break in 2023. So where does that all fit together?
Yeah. So in 2017, well, it was actually the previous year, in late 2016, I talked a gentleman by the name of Ben Rosario, who had founded the Hoka NAZ Elite professional running team here in Flagstaff. Talked him into letting me basically embed myself with the team as like an everyman. I was 46 years old, so it was 2017 when it actually happened. He said yes. And so, yeah, my wife and I lived in California at the time. We came out to Flagstaff for 13 weeks in the summer. It was like an entire marathon build, and I was 46 years old then, and even when I was 26, like I was nowhere near as good as the real pros on this team. So I was way out of my depth, but that was kind of the idea. Like I loved running so much that, and like I said, I'd had, like, the marathon in particular was my bugbear. Like, forever I wanted to run under 240, and I just kept knocking at the door and not making it. I think largely because I just couldn't stay healthy long enough. And so, yeah, I came out here just to, like, go all in for the sport in a way I never had. To truly live like a young elite gazelle. And it was an incredible experience. Regardless of how it ended, they were the best 13 weeks of my life, because I love running, and I had given myself permission to make running just the center of my universe for 13 weeks, and to be surrounded by all these, like, stallions, and to be coached at that level and have all the resources and support. It was incredible. And then it actually did end well. I very shockingly ran my fastest marathon ever, which is saying something, because it was like my 41st marathon, and I hadn't come within 8 minutes of my PR in 9 years. So like, I truly didn't even think that was possible, but it happened. And I just came away from it like wanting to share that. I'm like, why should I be the only runner who gets to experience something like this? So that's what inspired. Well, I wrote a book about it called Running the Dream, and then created Dream Run Camp here in Flagstaff.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting to refer to yourself as an everyman, because I think you're no slouch. What was the time you ran at the Chicago Marathon after that training period?
2 hours, 39 minutes and change.
Pretty impressive. And you talk in your book a little bit about this, sort of giving yourself permission to go all in. But I think for a lot of people listening, including myself, it's not always feasible to go completely all in the sense of,
Yep.
flying out to Flagstaff or Boulder and
Yep.
revolving your life around running. So in the context of somebody who has a job and or family, is it still possible to achieve mastery, or do you have to devote your life to running?
I think it is. I mean, by my definition, and that's a very good question. It's definitely one I've like mulled over. My 13-week Midsummer Night's Dream here in Flagstaff was only 13 weeks, and it ended all too quickly. And I went back to my regular life in California. I couldn't take the high altitude with me. I couldn't take my teammates or Ben Rosario with me. I had to leave a lot of it behind. But I did want to carry as much of it as I could, and I found out that was actually a lot. And I think, like, I mean, the essence of mastery is that, I mean, you are making the most of your constraints. So for a lot of us, that's simply talent. Like, imagine you were just like born a billionaire's child, and you didn't have to work, and you loved running, and you just wanted to see what you could do. Like, then like, it's like, well, it's your genes that are your main constraint, because, like, there's no other constraints, right? Money's no object, time is not a problem, but you're still running up against a constraint. So just because you have all the time and money and resources in the world doesn't mean you're going to go to the Olympics. So I think that's what all of us are doing all the time as athletes who want to see what we're capable of, is working within our constraints, whatever they may be. And for every man and women like us, those constraints are more practical in nature. Like, would you, like, perform better if you had more time to train? Sure. but that's not really what mastery is about. Mastery is about controlling what you can control. And so, yeah, I think it's a possibility that's open to any athlete.
Yeah, so if we're ruling out talent and or time and resources as the key distinction between mastery and sort of that pursuit or chase of mastery, after working with elite athletes who have reached that level, or even for yourself feeling like you've achieved your own full potential, if you had to generalize, what are some of those key differentiators that help people get to the next level?
Yeah, man, another good question. Yeah, so there are a few. The ones I would highlight are number one, passion. Just like you have to stay in love with it. I mean, you don't have to, but like to reach your full potential, you have to stay in love with it. Like I said, no tragedy if you fall out of love and switch to golf. But you, it's kind of a good news story, right? Like you kind of have to be having fun. You have to like genuinely want it versus just like disciplining yourself. And so that's what you see, especially the athletes who don't just reach the top but stay there. That is always the story. It's like any relationship, honestly. You have to keep the spark alive, and that can, how you do that can change over time, just like relationships do. So yeah, just keeping the hunger there, and the enjoyment is one, and then the other one is those who make them. What we're really looking at is like who improves the most over time, and it's the learners that improve the most over time. Athletes who I love apparently it's an apocryphal John Dewey quote, not a genuine one, but it's consistent with his philosophy. The line is, "We don't learn from experience; we learn from reflecting on experience," and like that's a differentiator. Like. You could have two runners who run 50 miles a week, for 5 years, and they have the same amount of experience, but one of them could be learning quite a bit more from the experience they're having. And as a coach, I see that all the time. So like some athletes are just like, they're just learners, and others need to be like encouraged to learn. And yeah, so those are two big ones.
I feel like there's a bit of self-filtering going on, because if you're somebody who's listening to this podcast or picking out a book on reaching your full potential, you're probably leaning towards the side of being a learner.
Yep. Yeah. But even so, like even athletes who have those traits, which I think kind of are essential to achieving like true mastery. I mean, even they self-limit in some way. Like we all do it. It's just human. So like perfection is really, the path to, perfection in endurance sports is like mostly about removing the obstacles you yourself create. You just have to like get the junk out of the way and let the process happen.
What did you consider your biggest junk on that path to achieving mastery?
This is also something I've thought a lot about. One for sure, in terms of ways I self-limited, and I was not conscious of these, always in the moment. Like it was only after some time passed, when I kind of look back at my missteps. One of them was impatience. Which is weird because like I'm an endurance athlete. I'm a writer. Both those pursuits really demand patience, but like by nature, I am not patient. And so in the process of just training to try to break 2:40 in the marathon or whatever, I would get impatient and I would try to hurry the process, and I did it again and again and again, and no shock, because my wife would tell you if she were in the room, like, yeah, Matt's like impatient in traffic, in supermarkets, in the workplace. Matt's just impatient. So no shocker that he's self-limiting through that trait as a runner. Another one, which is, I think, related, just all related to my intensity as a person, is that I would get greedy. So I would keep raising the bar, And like if training was going well, I'd be like, oh well, I think my original goal is too soft. I need to go for a more challenging goal, and then I would just keep raising the bar until I blew myself up. And then a third one is, like I said, I've thought a lot about this. I have I don't know if you call it like a high risk tolerance, but I kind of like crave risk. I thrive on risk, so I would take risks that other runners I discovered would not take, and I think that's one of the reasons I got injured a lot.
Yeah, I find it really interesting listening to what you consider your setbacks, that you define them all as almost moral qualities. I was expecting an answer more like, I always started my workouts too fast, or I focused too much on the numbers, but they're very personal qualities. Do you think that's the case for a lot of runners?
Yes, I mean, there's a line in the novel The Power of One. The mind is the athlete. That's the motto of the Zap Endurance team in North Carolina, an enclave of professional runners, and I love that little mantra, the mind is the athlete, because I really think it is like pursuing excellence in sport. It is a whole person journey. It's all of you, like whatever it is that that enables you in life outside of sport is going to enable you within sport. Whatever it is within yourself that limits you and holds you back in relationships, the workplace, chores, like all of it it's going to be the same stuff. Like you only have one mind to apply to everything. So it'll manifest in slightly different ways, based on which direction you're channeling it, but you're still you in every context. So this is, it all begins with like my own athletic journey. And for me, becoming the best athlete I could be was inseparable from becoming the best version of myself, like as a human being. Like early on, I mean, the reason I burnt out in high school was that I viewed myself as a coward. Like I was one of the best runners in my state, and I perhaps could have won an individual state title that I never won because I just didn't feel like I was willing to go as deep into the pain cave as other athletes were. And I thought I could see it. It's just like, this person isn't faster than me, but this person beat me, and it's because they're braver than I am. So when I got back into running in my late 20s, like that was a monkey on my back. Like I want to become a brave competitor. I want to see myself honestly as a brave man. And I didn't think I was one. And so I worked on that very consciously, and I felt like I made a lot of progress, and I could see it in the numbers. Like my numbers were getting better, but that was almost like an after effect of like just trying to grow as a person through running.
And to what extent, for these personal traits that carry over to running, do you grow through your training versus external factors? So using the example you gave of, say, becoming braver, do you push through that just by going through a bunch of difficult workouts and trying to execute them in a style you deem to be brave, or are there other things you can do outside to develop that skill?
I actually think the number one factor for me, and probably for most people, is like it has to be a very conscious intention. Like if you poll a group of runners, hey, do you think you could be tougher than you are? Like, most hands are going to go up. It's like, do you think you would benefit as a runner if you got tougher than you are? It's like, most hands go up again. And then the third question is like, what are you doing about it? And it's crickets. It's like for most athletes, it's just like a vague kind of, like pacing. Oh shit, I blew my pacing again. Maybe I'll be luckier next time. Well, I mean, shoot, you got 18 weeks till the next A race. Maybe you could work on your pacing. And so, and for me, just that intentionality, like you don't have to have it all figured out, like how you get tougher. I didn't. Like, in fact, to me, it felt like an impossible barrier. When I like in, the heat of competition, when I felt myself just not willing to go deeper, even though I knew I could, it felt like an immovable barrier. It's like, I can't, it's just, it's too much. Nevertheless, I'm like, well, that's my goal. That's what I'm going to do. And I'll figure it out. But sort of like the intention, where there's a will, there's a way, is what I'm saying. Like, if it's just like, you hope it happens along the way, it's not going to happen. But if it's actually, for me, in a lot of those races I did in my late 20s, like I forgot about like, PRs or time or what place I finished in. Like, I would grade my performance entirely subjectively. It's just like, how close to 100% of what you had to give did you leave out there? And I would be pretty ruthless about it. Like, I would take myself to task when I fell short, and I did again and again and again. But it was just, almost like brute force, honestly. Because I think the thing is, like, I think we are all tough. It's not a matter of like getting tougher. It's a matter of like channeling your toughness. And so it's no wonder that you don't necessarily need a hack to get there. Like, brute force will do it. Like, because like it's already in you. You just have to really want it and not tell yourself you do.
Yeah, and I think there really is something to that, actually wanting it and wanting to do what it takes to get there versus just kind of telling yourself that you will.
Yes.
And I found one of the best examples you gave in your book that really rang true to me is this idea of running your easy runs too easy. Because what you described there is that most runners just don't actually want to run it easy, and it makes sense. Like, it's so it's hard to push yourself to your limit. It's easy to dial it back and run easy, but so many of us don't. Why do you think it is that runners screw up the easy stuff, like just taking it easy on your easy days?
The reasons keep multiplying. I think there actually are quite a number. I think one of them it's my own conjecture, but I think there are two competing instincts at work in the average runner, in the average easy run. One is like this natural human instinct to complete a task. Like if you have like a pile of wood you need to chop, you just want to get it chopped, so that you're done chopping wood and you can go inside and have hot chocolate. So I think like we naturally like approach a run as a task, and like, that mindset is like, let's get this done. Like, so I can go have my hot chocolate. And that instinct impels you to push, to go faster. Same thing, like you can't get the wood chopped faster without working harder, right? So like that's the direction you're being pushed in by this instinct. But there's also like a natural human instinct that militates against unnecessary suffering or discomfort. So the problem is, like if you got the one instinct saying, let's get this over with, well, suddenly it doesn't feel very good. And then that other instinct comes into play and is like, wait. How much difference does it really make if we get it done in 50 minutes versus 40 minutes? Like, can't we just like enjoy this a little bit? And so what happens when you have these two instincts compromise? You end up kind of stuck in between. And physiologically, that's exactly where you see runners. Like if you just and actually other endurance athletes, if you just say, all right, you're gonna hop on the treadmill and you're just gonna do whatever for 40 minutes. So it's like no direction, just self-select a pace. Like that's where you will see the vast majority of runners go, is to like this moderate intensity, which is not actually easy. So kind of a no man's land.
It's interesting. There's a lot of psychology going on there, this sort of internal compromise. Are there other examples beyond easy runs when runners do that?
There's got to be. If I just think of something like, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, it's a little different. I think maybe the root psychology is similar, but like what you'll see like in a high intensity interval workout is if the coach says, this is the time I want you to hit, the athlete will say, yes, coach, I understand. You want me to hit this time in each of these 6 or 7 or 8 reps or whatever it is. But that's not actually what they'll do. What they'll actually translate that to is, I want you to get as close to this time as you can without going over it. Because if you go over it, you suck at running and you should quit. Like that's what they actually hear, because you'll see it. Athletes what they'll end up doing is they'll have very few bullseyes, so they'll seldom actually hit the target, which was the instruction. And their misses will almost always be on the high side, unless they really start too hot and then blow up and then involuntarily slow down. So yeah, I think it's like. and it really is it's like a 90% thing. Like 90% of runners do their easy runs too fast, and 90% actually also try to do their high intensity runs. It manifests in a slightly different way, but it's there's like a disconnect between like stated intention and actual intention.
And what do you actually put down on an athlete's training plan? Because obviously you don't want athletes pushing beyond what you prescribe. That's not the goal of the workout. But you also, I think, recognize that there's a need at times to pull back, whether that's sickness or weather conditions or whatever it may be. So how do you write the training plan so that an athlete looks at that and goes, this is what Matt Fitzgerald wants me to do, and I'm going to execute that exactly as prescribed and not equal to or better than?
It's mostly what's communicated around the plan that serves that purpose. Like I teach athletes to make a distinction between the letter of the workout and the spirit of the workout. And I want them to always understand the spirit of the workout, regardless of what the letter is. Because I don't know, I'll give them the best plan I can. But you know how it is, like you're a slightly different runner in every single workout you do. It's a different circumstance. And so for me, like what I teach athletes is the goal is to make the best possible use of today. Mm-hmm. And very, very often making the best possible use of today requires you to depart from the letter of the plan. This is what mastery is all about. It's like, it's like empowerment. Like I want the athletes to be able to make like good decisions in the heat of the moment for themselves. Like that's how I put myself out of a job, but that's also doing my job.
Yeah, and I think you advocate for a style of keeping your training simple and focusing on the most important things, which aligns with kind of what you just said. But another direction we've seen in this sport is sort of a much more data-driven approach and being hyper-focused on the minutia to the point where, we have super shoes that are right at the 40-millimeter limit, or you have athletes like the Ingebrigtsens or some of the Norwegian Ironman athletes who are taking their blood lactate levels in the middle of workouts just to make sure they're ultra precise. So on that spectrum, do you think you can be successful at either end, or is there quote unquote a proper way to train?
I actually think you can be successful at either end of that spectrum. That's the nice thing. I mean, there are certain have-tos about the developmental process. But there's also quite a bit of latitude. I mean, that's part of the fun of it, right? Like, there's no such thing as the perfect runner. It's not even a concept, let alone a possibility. There are so many different paths. That's what's exciting about it. Like, you can be as sciencey as you want, but you're never going to nail down like a formula to greatness. And And yeah, you see, like, that summer I spent like with the pros, there were 13 real pros on that team, and they had a lot in common, and that was very instructive. The passion, they were learners, but on the personality level, all over the place. From like more of like an Ingebrigtsen, to like the Kenyan, like easy come, easy go, Hakuma Matata. And yeah, so I think it's actually not only allowable but important that you be yourself as an athlete, and that's actually part of it. In the 5 stages of athlete development in my model, the 4th stage, one step short of mastery, is individuation, which is where like you go from following established best practices to finding your individual optimum. And like that's on all kinds of different levels, from like the nitty gritty of how your body responds to the same training versus another runner of more or less the same ability level, to like personality stuff where, if you're free spirited, too much structure is going to kill you. It just is. And it's, I'm not like a total data geek. I'm perceived as that. But for those who they're just like really analytical, they have those engineer type minds, you gotta let them do that. They need to be zoomed out very often, but like you still have to let them do it their way. So yeah, I think there's quite a bit of latitude. There's certain unbreakable rules, but there's a lot of room to play within that framework.
And does that idea of individuation apply as well to the analytical approach as it does to the more, I'll call it simple, but maybe free-spirited is the better way to put it. And when I'm thinking about that is in the context of like, if I'm measuring my blood lactate levels or prescribing a very precise interval duration, can that actually be calibrated to your specific strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, that is, I actually would be interested to hear from, like Jakob's coach.
We'd love to have him on if he's listening.
Yeah. I mean, that's what you run up against. Cause you'll have cultural differences, right? Like, I've been to Kenya, and they just have a certain way of doing things, and it works fine for most of them, but maybe like some talented young runners there would actually fare better from a Norwegian approach. They just never get exposed to it, and so maybe that actually ends up limiting them somehow. And you can see it happening the other way around, where the hyper analytical approach is du jour in Norway, but maybe there's like a Norwegian very talented with a Kenyan spirit who's stuck in Norway. It's just not a fit. Like, for sure that's a thing, and that's really like just getting back to the idea of like athlete development. It's always contextual, and you either have to be lucky with your context, because it like, as much as it has to be all on you, it can't be all on you. Like it truly does take a village for an athlete. I mean, you truly can't do it alone, and that's a theme in my book. It's like, like the elephant in the room here is like, you need a coach. I'm sorry, you might not have a coach, but like you need a coach, and not just a coach, but a good one. So like, either you are lucky enough to just like be born into the right context for you, or to find it, in an early stage of development, or you actually have to go find it or create it for yourself. And that is a point of emphasis in my coaching too. Like with athletes, I tell them like, as like, I'm your running coach. Like I need to stay in my lane, but like you should consider moving to a different place, Like if you love running that much, like that's not beyond the pale. Like if it's doable for you, consider it. Or like changing your work hours, having a talk with your boss, like all this kinds of stuff, or like hiring a coach, like giving yourself permission, or like getting sports massage routinely. Like there's just some freedom for every athlete to create the context they need. And yeah, I guess it's circular because like there is a little bit of responsibility back on you. Like, how do I know how to pick the right coach for me? So yeah, there's luck, there's contingency. That's the nature of things.
And maybe this is a stupid question, but as you said, everyone needs a coach. Does that include somebody who's mastered their sport?
I would say that, I mean, this gets semantic at a certain point, but I think you can not need a coach and yet benefit from a coach. Like as a very experienced writer, I mentioned I started running when I was 11. I started writing when I was 9. I'm 53 now. Like, I would like to believe I don't need a thesaurus. I know a lot of words. I have a good vocabulary, but I still use one. Like, I can still benefit from a thesaurus. So I think that's the distinction. And, the final stage, mastery is asymptotic. Like, you can always keep going by some measure, but there is a last stage of the developmental process, and that's what I call the challenge stage. And that's really just where you just need to avoid complacency, to avoid letting down or coasting or, like failing to stay humble. And that's what you see in champions, when like they take risks. It's like Tiger Woods, became the greatest golfer who ever walked the earth, and then remade his stroke 3 times and kicked ass with all 4 strokes. But like, this was a guy in the challenge phase of mastery of the sport of golf. He's like, I cannot take my foot off the gas. Like, there's still more I can find in myself. And so that's where a coach can really help. Like Eliud Kipchoge and Patrick Sang, like that's a great example. Like Kipchoge, for all he's achieved, he says like, I need this guy, or I don't need this guy, but I want this guy. Like I'm like, I have no plans to ever like leave my coach, and he's Eliud Kipchoge. And I know from having read a really great book, can't remember the title, about Patrick Sang, that like that's exactly his role with Kipchoge. It's like he's the challenger. It's like, you're the man, I'm the challenger.
Matt, we've drawn a lot of interesting comparisons on this show, but I think comparing a coach to a thesaurus is probably a new one.
Right on. I've done it before.
Have you? On other podcasts?
No, in a blog. Yep.
Yes. I love it.
But it was actually, I compared a power meter to a thesaurus in the blog.
Oh, a power meter. Okay. Definitely can tell you're data driven.
Yeah.
So I realize that maybe I'm picking a lot on the Ingebrigtsens here, but I'm only going to do it a little bit more because I think they're such a good example of this sort of ultra focus on precision training. But one of the other things you touch on is the need to have interests outside of the sport, or something you call self-complexity. But if you're talking about someone like the Ingebrigtsens, from what I've read, they live almost a monk-like existence where the day revolves around running, strength work, sleeping, napping, and anything else that is specifically designed to enhance their training. Is that counterproductive, or are there instances where actually devoting yourself to running can be beneficial?
Yeah, I think, if I'm going to be like in an advice-giving role, I'm going to say, because I think, kind of the assumption is that you do have to be, one-dimensional and monastic. And what the evidence I've seen suggests is that that's actually a myth. You will have, just complete obsessives, like one-dimensional athletes who do become truly great, or, master their sport. but more often, and that's the thing that surprised me, because I actually imbibed that same assumption, like as a sports fan. It's just, oh yeah, they're just monomaniacal, it's hockey or nothing, or whatever the sport. And when I actually like got to know personally some of the top endurance athletes in the world, I actually saw that was not the case. That these were actually like these athletes were often more well-rounded than the ambitious amateurs, like one step below them, just balanced, both just like kind of like dispositionally, but also in their lives. So I think that is more the norm, actually, is to have self-complexity. So the message I want to put out there is like, hey, it's possible, to achieve your potential as an athlete and yet have other priorities and even higher priorities than your sport.
And for yourself right now, I know you're still running, maybe not quite doing the same training as when you were running with all of the elites, but what do you consider your other priorities right now?
Definitely my wife, number one. That's kind of a stock answer, but it's very, very true in my case. Because I'm a very driven, I am like obsessive by nature. My passions are very consuming for me, and it doesn't actually always make me the best partner. And so this is something my wife and I talk about, like where it's just like, hey, there's a tension here. Like I swear to God, you're my top priority. Like in my own private thoughts, when you're not around, like this is what I think and believe, and yet my behavior does not always align with that. And so there's just like, I just got to keep myself honest, and my wife is very good at keeping me honest. And that's kind of like actually I don't know if you can call it a New Year's resolution, but like that's kind of my intention for this year. I got very, very pulled into Dream Run Camp to the point where I felt like I'm kind of sucking as a partner right now. And so like just course correcting back in that direction. And if my running or whatever else takes a hit as a result of that, like fine. And then also, just my passions, like I live to work. I don't seem to really need or desire breaks. And so that's always going to be like, it's, like a day without writing or coaching is like a day without sunshine for me. And that's, like I said earlier, like we are who we are. And, we have to work with what we've got. And that's always going to be the case for me. Like I'm very much like my dad, who's 81 years old, and he still writes every day. So like I know the path I'm on.
That's awesome, Matt. And one of the other things I really took away from your book, just for myself running to keep me excited, is this idea of hard fun. And it's so motivating to work hard, but enjoy the process. It sounds like you've done a lot of things to keep your training fun and also have things outside of your training that keep you motivated. So I guess for athletes listening, but also for yourself, what is it that you suggest to help keep running hard but fun?
I think on the fun side, if it comes back to introspection, just not like almost every runner can tell a love story about their relationship with running. Like they fell in love with it. And so like, there you have it. You fell in love with it for a reason that you actually weren't even in control of. So there's your spark. And like that, it's just a matter of like tending that spark from there and not losing touch with what got you into it in the first place. So, it could have been initially like it's me time, or it's a way to challenge myself, and then fast forward and it's just all about qualifying for Boston and it's not fun anymore. It's like, well, just rewind the tape. Like remember who you were in the moment when you fell in love. I forgot the question actually. Did that half answer it?
I mean, it kind of half answered it. Yeah, I was asking about hard fun and how you're keeping your own running fun. Yeah, so it sounds like that story plays into it.
Yeah. It's just the idea of just like knowing what your why is, like, because everyone has their own recipe for fun, like what it means for running, what it requires for running to be fun for them. So that's where you just have to keep in touch with your why, and what gives heat to your flame. And then the hard part is, running is hard. So like, that is what you signed up for. But athletes can kind of lose touch with that as well. They're like, maybe super shoes can do it for me instead of like, testing myself. And so just like remembering that like there's a sweet spot, with the challenge of your training, like not challenging enough, you're not going to improve. That's not very satisfying. And then if it's too challenging, you're going to burn out. It's not going to be fun anymore. So just remembering that like you actually want it to be challenging, and that keeping it challenging actually requires that you kind of move the goalposts a bit as you move along. So yeah, a lot of it just comes back to introspection, and just being in touch with yourself and giving yourself permission to do it your way.
Yeah, Matt, I was going to start to wrap up on that question, but after you kind of touched on this, I have to ask, what's your why for running at this point? I know we're asking the deep questions here.
yeah, and I gotta go, but I will say that like one thing I found, like when I got long COVID, and it was 4 years without like being physically able to run. What I discovered was like I wanted to just put on my big boy pants and just like my dad when he broke his hip, just like make peace with it. And I did it to the best of my ability, but I wasn't as happy. Like nothing else scratched the itch the way it did. And like being able to run, not the way I did before now, I'm happier. and so that's really all I need it to be at this point. And I'll challenge myself and I'll find, different ways. Just being able to run with the people at Dream Run Camp is awesome. But yeah, the main thing is just like recognizing that it just has to be there. It just has to be a presence in my life, and wherever it takes me from there is fine.
Awesome, Matt. Well, I wish you the best of luck with your own running. I think super inspiring. Definitely, you've inspired me today and reading your book to chase my own full potential. We'll link to your book in the show notes, Chasing Mastery. I think it comes out March 26th. Is that right?
I think so. Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, we'll link it there. Should be coming out the day after this episode publishes. So, Matt, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.